Hey, my name is Will Peak, woodwind repair specialist and inventor of the Incline thumb rest. In this video, I'll be demonstrating how I remove the stock left-hand thumb rest from various modern saxophones. In many cases, this is relatively easy and the player can do it themselves. Other times, it's a little bit more involved and I recommend taking it to a repair shop instead. In either case, it's a pretty quick procedure if done methodically. I hope this video can be a valuable resource, whether you're a saxophone player looking to outfit your own saxophone with an aftermarket thumb rest, or you're a repair person removing thumb rests for your clients. One of the most common types of thumb rests I see are these black plastic thumb rests. They come on a lot of different types of saxophones, most notably modern Yamahas and many Selmer Paris saxophones. If you have a modern Selmer, it's usually pretty easy to remove the thumb rest, and there's a good chance that you're not even going to need any tools or the expertise of a repair person. And that's because the plastic thumb rest is only held on with a double-sided adhesive patch. So all you need to do is grab, wiggle, and pull, like so. Now, I've removed this thumb rest already, so you'll see that there's no patch on this. But if this were a stock thumb rest that had never been removed before, usually they let go for me after 10 to 15 seconds or so of wiggling. If your thumb rest is more stubborn, treat it like it's a Yamaha in one of the later steps. If you have a modern Selmer and your stock thumb rest is metal like this one, which comes standard on Series 3 altos, it's even easier because there's usually a screw that holds it on. So all you need to do is go in with a small screwdriver, loosen that screw a little bit, and just remove. If you can't remove your plastic thumb rest by hand, it's probably because it's either been glued in place or it's a modern Yamaha or a Buffet Senzo. In which case, I recommend this method. We're basically going to pry off the thumb rest, for which I recommend a pretty standard flathead screwdriver and a good thick piece of leather, or something similar. And what we're basically going to do is use a nearby post as a fulcrum, using the leather to protect it. I'll get the tip of the screwdriver underneath the edge of the thumb rest, and I'm going to gently pry and gradually apply more pressure. Now this thumb rest is coming off very easily because I've removed it before, but if this were a Yamaha, it would probably be fighting me just a little bit. So I'd just be gradually increasing the pressure I use, and if it moves but then stops, I'll move to a different post to get a better angle, or another angle I should say, and it'll come off eventually like that. If you're not having any luck just prying the thumb rest off, you may need to use a little bit of heat to soften any adhesive holding the thumb rest on. And I would absolutely recommend using a little bit of heat if the saxophone in question is a Buffet Senzo, as those thumb rests are on extremely tight. As a heat source, I recommend something like a hot air gun. And I also recommend removing any keys nearby that have pads in them to avoid damaging those pads. And as you apply heat, continue prying with your other hand like so. And I would aim the heat gun at the body of the saxophone just next to the thumb rest rather than at the thumb rest itself. There's a good chance that if you use heat, you will melt the thumb rest at least slightly, in which case it's easy enough to replace these fairly inexpensively, and your repair shop might even just have a few on hand. If you have a metal thumb rest, such as on this Yanagasawa 993 soprano sax, I recommend you take it to your repair person to have it removed. These thumb rests are usually held on with epoxy, so adding some heat will be necessary to soften that epoxy as you pry up the thumb rest. So the approach at removing this is very similar to the prying method that I showed, in that you will use the screwdriver to pry or something similar, and a piece of leather or something similar to protect nearby posts. The only difference is that we'll be heating the thumb rest as we pry. This post is actually safe to use as a fulcrum so long as you keep the hinge rod and the key installed. So I'm first going to get the screwdriver and the leather positioned. I'm going to grab my hot air gun. This is a Music Medic hot air gun set to 300 right now. $200 works, 150 works. You don't usually need a ton of heat, but there's no harm in turning it up just a little bit higher. If you need to use a flame, I would recommend removing nearby keys with the exception of high D, as having that hinge rod and key installed reinforces the post. But any felts or pads you don't want to inadvertently burn or reseat, it's good to get those out of the way if you're using fire. And I'd be careful too. There's no need to use a lot of heat with this, with a flame, so it would suck to accidentally burn lacquer if you don't need to. Which is another reason I recommend using a hot air gun. So the epoxy has let go. I've got a glove on hand. You can use a rag or whatever. To pull it off the rest of the way. And see there's some leftover epoxy in there. Which is another reason I recommend having a repair person do this, because we're going to need to clean off that epoxy. If you need to use a little bit of heat to remove the remaining epoxy, I would recommend removing any keys with pads or sheet materials that you don't want to inadvertently burn. Your tech might have a preferred method of removing epoxy like this, but I often find that after heating up the thumb rest and the glue, that you can pick it off with your fingernails. You may need to add a little bit more heat, as I mentioned, to soften it more. In which case, be careful touching the saxophone with your bare hands after that. But I've already removed most of this epoxy with just my fingernails, and I haven't reheated it yet. So, just wanted to throw that out there. Now that we've cleaned the remaining adhesive from the thumb rest chimney, we can install the Incline thumb rest. Since this is a Yanagisawa soprano, I'll be using size S2, as S2 was designed specifically for Yanagisawas. So it should go on easily and rotate freely. And take your small Allen wrench and tighten one of the set screws to secure it. From here on, all you need to do is experiment and adjust, which I will cover in a later video. Thanks.